Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, one of the really intriguing challenges facing artificial intelligence. How do we make our vision language models, VLMs, truly understand the world they see? Rather than just making, let's say, educated guesses. You've definitely encountered these models. They're kind of everywhere now. They're the brains behind sophisticated image searches, or those AI assistants that can describe a photo for you. And they're undeniably powerful, but if you use them much, you probably noticed they can sometimes be a little bit off. They might conjure up details that just aren't there, or maybe sidestep visual cues entirely, relying mostly on text. So we've got this fascinating new paper in front of us. It's titled Self-Rewarding Vision Language Model via Reasoning Decomposition. And it introduces this new approach called Vision SR1. Our mission for this deep dive is really to unravel how this self-rewarding mechanism helps VLMs genuinely perceive, improve their reasoning. And crucially, how they do it without needing constant human guidance, like teaching an AI to check its own work.
That's a really good way to frame it. See, the fundamental challenge with many current VLM training methods anyway is they often get what we call sparse visual signals. What that means is the models don't get enough explicit, detailed feedback on how to interpret what they're seeing. So consequently, they often fall back on their strong language abilities, sometimes prioritizing, textual context over actual visual input. Vision SR1 tries to tackle this head-on by building a mechanism where the models themselves judge their own visual understanding. It creates a much richer feedback loop.
Okay, so these perplexing issues you mentioned, let's focus on the two big ones, visual hallucinations and these language shortcuts. For someone interacting with these models, what does that actually look like? Can you give us a clearer picture?
Sure. Let's imagine you ask a VLM to describe an image. A visual hallucination might be, say it looks at a picture of a dog in a park, and it confidently says, I see a dog chasing a frisbee, but there's no frisbee in the picture at all. The model isn't just wrong, it's sort of inventing details, maybe based on common associations. Dogs, parks, frisbees. It puts them together. It's basically making things up. Now, language shortcuts, they're a bit subtler. Here, the model might get the right answer to a question, but it does so mainly by using its text knowledge, maybe inferring the answer just from the question's words or captions it's seen. It might ignore visual details that don't fit its text-based guess. It gets the answer right, but, well, not for the right reason.
So it's less about seeing, more about guessing based on probability and text patterns. And the paper highlights that the usual ways to fix this, like having humans label everything or using labels from other big models, they have their own serious problems, don't they?
Yeah. That's right. Human annotations, they give you great quality data, but they're incredibly slow and costly. It's almost impossible to do it at the scale needed for these huge VLM datasets. Then you have distilled labels generated by other AI models. They're cheaper, sure. But the issue there is they often inherit the same biases and limitations of the models they came from. And this can lead to something called reward hacking, where the model learns how to get a good score by sort of gaming the system, exploiting those static external signals. It gets good at the test, but not necessarily better at actually understanding visually. And this is really where Vision SR1 comes in with a totally different self-contained idea.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Vision SR1 uses this self-rewarding idea, which sounds a bit strange. How does an AI reward itself? What's the mechanism?
The key idea is to break down the VLM's reasoning into two clear steps, one after the other. First is visual perception. Second is language reasoning. The model is specifically designed first to produce a really detailed, self-contained visual perception. Think of it as a comprehensive description of the image, so complete that you could, in theory, use only this description to answer a question about the image, without ever needing to look back at the original picture. Then, once it has generated this perception, the very same VLM gets prompted again. But this time, its job is to do the language reasoning using only its own description it just made and the original question. Now, if the model can get the correct answer using just its own perception, then that initial perception is considered visually faithful. And when that happens, the model essentially gives itself a self-visual reward. It's like an internal check for accuracy.
That's a really clever way around the annotation bottleneck. So it's basically asking itself, okay, did I describe that well enough that I can answer the question without peeking at the image again?
Mm-hmm.
Does this add a lot of extra computation time during training, though?
Well, it does add a processing step during the training phase. Yes, there's more complexity there. But the argument is that the potential long-term gains in model reliability and, needing less human oversight probably make it worthwhile. This self-visual reward is then combined with the usual rewards like, was the final answer correct? Did it follow the output instructions? This combined feedback signal is what really helps strengthen both the model's ability to see accurately and its ability to reason logically based on what it sees. It's a constant internal check, forcing the model to refine its seeing before it thinks.
Let's get into the nuts and bolts a bit more. How does this self-reward thing actually work in practice? The paper mentions a very specific structured output format Vision SR1 uses. Could you walk us through that, and why is that structure so important?
Certainly. For every task, the model doesn't just give an answer. Its output follows a precise see-think format. It looks exactly like this. Visual perception, see visual perception, then a separator, then think another separator, and finally answer A, answer. Here, C is that crucial self-contained visual perception we talked about. It is the language reasoning part, the chain of thought showing how it got to the answer. And A is the final answer. The really critical part here is that C must contain all the visual details needed for the next step, the reasoning step. It's not just about neat formatting, it's fundamental to the self-reward. If C isn't good enough, the model can't properly test its own understanding later without cheating, essentially, by looking back at the image data. That would undermine the whole self-supervision idea.
Okay. The structure forces the model to commit to its perception before reasoning. That makes sense. And the paper talks about this using information theory, which sounds pretty fundamental. Can you simplify that angle for us?
I can try. Think of it like this. Standard reinforcement learning often focuses on maximizing something called IAQ. Basically, how much the answer depends on the question. But this can, unintentionally, encourage those language shortcuts. The model learns to answer based just on the question text, maybe ignoring the image. Vision SR1 adds the CERCAP, that's the self-visual reward signal. By adding HERCAP, the system pushes the model to also maximize ICII, which you can think of as asking, okay, how much does my internal visual perception actually depend on the input image? It forces a stronger link between what the model sees and what it internally represents. So the answers become much more grounded in the visual evidence, not just language patterns. This dual optimization, answering the question well and describing the image faithfully, gives a more balanced, robust training signal.
Right, so it sounds great in theory, rigorous training, self-checking, but what about the results? How did Vision SR1 actually perform when they tested it?
They tested it pretty thoroughly. The researchers put together a data set called Vision SR1 47K. That's around 47,000 examples drawn from 24 different benchmarks, so quite diverse. It covers a good mix, about 30% mathematical reasoning, 30% common sense knowledge, and nearly 40% general visual understanding. They also use something called a cold start, supervised fine-tuning dataset first, which is interesting. It helps get the models used to producing that specific see-think output format before the main self-rewarding training kicks in, makes the process more efficient.
And the results look pretty strong overall. Did it perform well across the board, or were there specific areas where it really shone?
The results were quite compelling, showing consistent improvements. Across a wide range of tests, general visual tasks like MMMU Pro, MMVet, even complex math reasoning in Matverse, and specific checks for hallucinations using HallucinBench Vision SR1 generally did better than the baseline models. For instance, with a 7 billion parameter model, Vision SR1 hit an average score of 58.8. compared to 57.4 for Vision R1, a similar model without this specific self-reward structure. That shows a clear, positive impact across different types of reasoning. It wasn't just marginal gains, it felt like a solid step up in reliable understanding.
They also did an ablation study, right, where they took out the self-visual reward component to see what happened. What did that reveal about how important that specific part is?
Yes, and that study was really crucial for confirming their hypothesis. It clearly showed that removing the self-visual perception reward led to consistently worse performance overall. For example, they mentioned a 3 billion parameter model. Without the self-reward, it scored 51.5 on average. But the full Vision SR1 with that self-reward mechanism reached 52.9. That difference directly validates that the self-assessment of visual perception isn't just an add-on, it's a core component driving the improved capabilities. It confirms the central idea.
Now, beyond just accuracy scores, the paper introduced this metric called the language shortcut rate, LSR. What exactly is LSR measuring, and why is it so important for understanding how these VLMs actually behave, especially if we want to trust them?
LSR, the language shortcut rate, quantifies how often a model gives the correct final answer, but does so based on an incorrect or incomplete visual perception, the C part, in their format. A high LSR is, well, it's a bit of a red flag. It suggests the model is relying heavily on guessing from text or context, not really understanding the visual information properly. And importantly, Vision SR1 generally showed a lower average LSR compared to the models trained without that self-reward component. For that 7B model again, the average LSR for Vision SR1 was 6.7, whereas it was 7.9 for the version without the self-reward. This tells us it's not just getting the answer right more often, it's more likely getting it right because it understood the image correctly.
So lower LSR means it's truly seeing to answer, not just making smart text-based guesses. I thought it was really striking that the paper points out how high this shortcut rate can be in multimodal math problems. Can you maybe give an example of how a VLM might shortcut a visual math problem? Why is that such a worry?
Sure, imagine a simple problem shown in an image with, say, text asking, if there are 3 red apples and 5 green apples pictured, how many total apples? A shortcutting VLM might just read the text 3 red apples and 5 green apples, see the word total, and just do the math. 3 plus 5 equals 8, purely based on the language. But what if the image actually showed only maybe 2 red apples and 4 green ones? The shortcutting model would still output 8 because its language understanding correctly processed the numbers from the question, completely ignoring the visual reality in the image. And that's a big problem for tasks needing high visual fidelity, like analyzing scientific images or checking manufacturing quality. You need the AI to report what's really there. It makes us question, are improvements we see in math VLM benchmarks always due to better visual reasoning, or sometimes just better language-based guessing? Vision SR1's method directly pushes against that.
Lastly, they looked at another potential issue. How does this kind of multimodal training affect just plain text reasoning? Sometimes focusing on vision can make models worse at language tasks, right?
That's a known trade-off, yes. Sometimes multimodal training leads to what's called text-only forgetting. The model's language skills might dip a bit, but interestingly, Vision SR1 seemed quite effective at reducing this degradation, particularly on mathematical text-only tests like Math 500 and GSM-8K. And even more, it actually showed larger gains on general knowledge text tasks like MMLU Pro and Super GPQA compared to the Vision R1 baseline. It suggests that by explicitly separating and refining both the visual perception and the language reasoning signals, Vision SR1 not only boosts the multimodal side, but also helps maintain and maybe even strengthen the text-only abilities too. It seems to offer a more balanced improvement.
So wrapping this up, what's the big picture here for AI that needs to see and understand? We've explored how Vision SR1 brings in this really powerful, self-rewarding idea. It lets VLMs check their own visual homework, so to speak. The real insight seems to be teaching AI to be its own visual fact-checker, moving from just external feedback to internal critique. And this method doesn't just help them see more accurately, it actively cuts down on those language shortcuts and visual mistakes that have been tricky. It seems focused on building models that are truly grounded in what they perceive, leading to, hopefully, more reliable AI.
I think what's really compelling is the elegance of it. The model learns to teach itself in a very specific, structured way. It ensures its understanding rests on a solid foundation of visual data, checked internally, not just on language probabilities or potentially flawed external signals. It really does feel like a significant step towards AI that we can trust more, especially in its perception of the world.
A model that can judge if its own visual description is good enough to answer a question without needing the original image again. That feels like a quite sophisticated level of self-assessment for an AI. It definitely makes you wonder, what other complex skills could AI systems learn to teach themselves if they could continuously self-verify their understanding across different senses or data types, constantly refining their own internal picture of the world? Definitely something to think about until our next deep dive.